Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the Midday magazine. I'm your host, Burhaan, and today we are going to be talking about expat life in the Gulf. So expat life we did Turkey on Sunday, and we had a really good discussion with Brother Jawad and with Rihana and Noura about expat life in Turkey, especially kind of for British Muslims. And today we're going to be covering the Gulf countries, in other words, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar. We may talk a little bit about Bahrain and Saudi from our experiences, but mainly we're focusing on those three countries because that's where the guests come from. We are live broadcasting on 87.9 FM in the London area and on ramadanradio.org throughout the world, I suppose, and also live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. And you can join us by calling us with your questions, with your comments around what you want to know about expat life in the Gulf region, about the various countries, about topics we're going to be discussing, education, visas, housing, lifestyle, whatever these kind of things are. Please do join us and text in or WhatsApp or call us and come and join us. You can be live on air, no problem. The number is 077 614 60614. 077 614 60614. And my guests today are Brother Shujaat Shah, who's a operations director in the healthcare industry, joining us from Abu Dhabi. Assalamu alaikum, Shah.
Welcome, Salam Burhaan. Thank you for having me.
Not at all, my pleasure. And my other guest, who was brought up in Kuwait, so technically an expat, Mustafa, who was a management consultant with the Big Four and now runs his own management consultancy. Assalamu alaikum, Mustafa.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah as well.
Welcome, guys, and thank you very much for joining us and bringing your experience. Like I said, we have experience from Abu Dhabi, and Shujaat also lived in Doha, in Qatar, and Mustafa lived for a long time in Kuwait and now lives here in the UK. And of course, I lived in Qatar for almost 10 years as well. So hopefully I can bring some of that experience. And all three of us as people who live and work in the Gulf know there's a lot of travel involved. So I think between us, we have experience of working, traveling, seconding in Saudi, in Bahrain, probably in maybe other non-Gulf countries as well. A little bit of work in Egypt or Jordan and these sort of places. So we can extend to that if people have questions about it. But let's kick off with the countries that we do know about. And I guess I'll start off with the same questions I asked the guys in Turkey, which is, maybe Mustafa, you can take this one.
Okay.
Just from your experience, just kind of from talking to people, etc. What are the reasons why people end up in the Gulf from the UK? We talked in Turkey, there was a lot about the Islamic drive, right?
Mm.
And people they look at people like Erdogan, they look at the history of Turkey, and they think, okay, this is a place to go.
Right.
I think there's some element of that for the people going to the Gulf, but I don't think it's quite this. I don't think the emphasis is quite as much as it was before. Maybe. What's your thoughts?
I think there's categories of people. So let me start from saying you're right. Right. So
that's good. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are people that definitely go for Islamic reasons. So it's fundamental for lots of British Muslims, right, to go and be in a country where they can practice their religion. But there are different categories of people, generally speaking. There are people that would go for the Islamic reason, and there's a large part of that. But there's a lot of those individuals that would like to go and experience a different lifestyle. So it's different for them it's difficult for them to go to another Western country, European country, be settled down there, right, from a culture, from a religious perspective. And I think an overseas experience of Middle East really appeals to them with the halal food and be able to practice their religion. And finally, financially, right, they've all known that it's tax-free income. So there's an aspect of that as well that comes into play. But generally, that's what my understanding is. And every time I've come across individuals, right, that why they've come down here, that has been the reason. There is one more, and if I may share that, sometimes someone's partner is not from the UK, might be from another country from
Sure.
India Park, and they would like to be close to their family. And that's the other reason that it becomes easier for them to have an access to those countries at a short flight. And those could be other reasons that people do move over to Middle East as well.
That's very true. That's a good point, because they find themselves as a kind of midpoint, for instance, between the UK and Pakistan or Bangladesh or something like that. So it makes it much easier. Shujaat, from your experience as well, do you find a similar thing? I think that, you know, there is that element, like Mustafa was saying, but obviously there's the very financial, you know, kind of the financially attractive packages there as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there are different motivations that people have for coming out to the Middle East. I think financial freedom is a given, right? Everyone knows about the tax-free salaries in this region, and people often weigh up the benefit of that against losing some of those other freedoms you may have in the West. But for the most part, I think it's people wanting to widen their outlook on life, getting a different perspective. I think for younger families also, it's very appealing. It's a great place to be for young families, new experiences for children, bringing them up in a different environment to maybe what you experience. I also think from a professional point of view, there is a bucket of professionals who perhaps have worked in the UK or Europe for quite some time, and maybe you reach a ceiling in your career, and we know the facts speak for themselves around the percentage of BME in the top CXO positions.
Yeah.
In places like the UK, and I think there are many people who just want a new experience. They've achieved what they set out to professionally, and they want to diversify and do the same, but in a different setting.
Yeah,
so I think that's definitely applicable. Yeah.
And do you find, I mean, in the UAE, you're in Abu Dhabi, right? But is there a difference in the kind of expats you find in Abu Dhabi from Dubai and Sharjah in terms of what motivation is driving them? Do you find that, I mean, if I'm being simplistic, do you find the people who are a bit more kind of Islamic going to Sharjah more so than Dubai, and the people who are more, you know, want the glamour or the money is more in Dubai? I don't know, maybe that's oversimplifying it.
Yeah, I think that's probably oversimplifying it, because Islam is a religion for all the countries in the Middle East, right? And you can find peace and faith wherever you are, whether it's in Dubai or whether it's in Sharjah. But I see what you're trying to say. In places like Sharjah, which are coming along, they're probably not as developed as places like Dubai. The opportunities there are different. So I think it attracts a different kind of professional. Most people who come out to the UAE, the opportunities they'll find would be in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. These are the two most progressive, most developed emirates. But that being said, there are new opportunities coming up in the tourism sector in places like Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah. There are hospitals, schools in all those places. So depending on which profession you are in, you can find opportunities all across the country.
And I think if it was just like the Islamic motivation, you'd find many more people going to Saudi, right? And that's not the case. So there's clearly a balance of motivations here, because not everybody's ending up in Makkah, Medina, or Jeddah, or that. And even when they go to Saudi, they'll end up in Riyadh. So there are multiple motivations, as you guys said. And from my own perspective, one of the things which wasn't a motivation for moving, but it was something I would now advise people if they are moving there. One of the advantages is that you get exposed to so many different people when you're out there, because the expat community is so diverse. You meet Muslims from, literally dozens of different countries who you may not meet over in London or in in Sheffield or Leeds or Manchester or Birmingham, you know, these big conurbations, you'll come across them perhaps, but you won't live with them, you won't interact with them so much. And I met, you know, Muslims from all over the place, and non-Muslims as well, from places where, you know, in South America, etc. The exposure that you get is phenomenal because it's such a crucible of different communities.
I agree, Burhaan. I think UAE, Qatar, these are very diverse countries. Just to give you an example, where I work in hospital, there are over 85 nationalities represented. So just think about that for a moment. And where would you find that? And where else would you find that?
Yeah. Oh, we had a question in already. Sorry, Mustafa. Go on.
No, I was about to say that I think it depends on the country as well. So I think Dubai and Abu Dhabi being a lot more open and more cosmopolitan, you get people from all over the place. If you go to the likes of Saudi, right, and Kuwait, the nationality diversity is a lot less.
Okay.
And it's not to say that's any good or bad. It's just what attracts them because they're not on people's radar as a first choice of countries to go to at times. And there are reasons, and there are valid reasons, and I'm more than happy to elaborate from my opinion. But I would agree, it's still a place to go and meet people. And it is a fantastic way to experience how different Muslims are there in the world, which are different and still alike us.
Well, before we go to the question, why don't you elaborate? You know, that's a very interesting point. What do you think the key differences of why people, in your experience of Kuwait, it is generally seen as the less attractive of the big four? I'm kind of out of the GCC countries. Correct. I'm kind of putting Bahrain and Oman to one side for the time being because you know that they are slightly further down the list in terms of the number of expats that they have and how attractive they are, etc. Or perceived to be, anyway. I mean, I think Oman's lovely personally, but yeah. So you've really got it. Really goes in order. It probably goes UAE, and then within the UAE you have ranking, and then probably second is Qatar, and then probably third is Saudi, and fourth is Kuwait. I mean, I would probably put it in that order.
True. I think, but sometimes I also feel that Oman might be before Kuwait, right? At times, it's just that's the way you look at things. But I think let's focus on Kuwait as an example, right? Because I've got some real-hand experience on that. So I think Kuwait is, if you've lived there, out of all the countries, you probably would say it's the best place to be, right? Across the countries, because it's not as advanced as the likes of Dubai, right, or even Doha, right, but it's not as restrictive as the Saudi. It gives you the balance of being where you need to be, right, and you can live how you would like to be. But I think, generally speaking, the impact of the attitudes of the local people sometimes is very different. And the interaction between the expats and the locals is very minimal because of the language barriers, and they're not up there, right, from a language perspective, right? Yes, they might be able to speak in English, but they're not real comfortable, and it's not a two-way conversation. They would probably like us to speak in their language, right, to make it easier. And I think sometimes those barriers, right, play a wider role. Plus, people coming from a different background or kind of origin countries, they've got a different connotation in those countries because they have got a labor community, a lot of them that come from those original countries. And from a looks perspective and from just a perception perspective, they just treat everyone exactly as a labor class. And that sometimes comes across as demeaning. At other times, right, they don't feel respected, right, and that those are some challenges, right, in countries like Kuwait, who can be. And I'm not kind of doing a negative side of it. I'm just being the realistic side of it. However, if you do start speaking their language and if you start interacting, and there is a lot of work that we need to do on our side to be able to integrate with them, they can become your best friends And
Yeah, of
the
course.
way it will be, right, is they'll be just like us. And it's just that side of it.
Yeah, it's a two-way street, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. We've got questions coming in thick and fast, so I'm gonna turn to those. And if anybody else has some questions, then please do join us. The number is 077 614 60614. You can message us on Facebook, and I think you can message us on YouTube as well. I'm not sure. I'm not really technically proficient. So the first question, Shujaat, why don't you take this one? I think you can see it as well. It's I've heard that the financial packages are a lot less generous now. So it's much harder to make the move, especially if you have lots of children to educate. And that's, I mean, I would broadly concur with that. But please give me your thoughts, especially in the light of the fact that there is now a drive to, kind of Emiratization, Saudiization, Qatarization, to kind of lessen the burden on the country from kind of expat salaries.
No, I agree. I think the salaries of the past are no longer. The packages are still very competitive, I would say, when you benchmark with similar roles in the UK. But I would agree that if you have a large family, it does become difficult because in a lot of the packages, the schooling allowances are capped.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you per child, you may be paying an extra amount per year, and if you have 4 or 5 children, that
Mm-hmm.
becomes a challenge. Previously,
just from a numbers point of view, if I throw a couple of numbers at you, would you broadly agree with that? So that the school fees approximately in dirhams, or I'll convert it into pounds, is approximately £10,000 a year per child. And you'll probably get maybe £4,000 of that, maybe 5,000 as an allowance.
Yeah, the school fees are around £10,000 a year on average. I'd say, depending on your employer, you'd probably get between 4,000 and 8,000.
Okay.
Depending on your employer and depending on your seniority as well.
Sure.
That would be the range.
There's still quite a burden, even if it's 8, you're still talking about, if you've got, say, 3 children, you're still you're still making up quite a lot over the course of the year, depending on what your salary is, of course. I mean, if you're well paid, then maybe it doesn't affect as much. But if you're entry level, or if you're still kind of in the middle part of your career, if you're kind of your early 30s and you've got 3 kids in primary school, that could be a struggle, right?
It can be, and employers also are they're capping the benefits for the number of children. So I think there are some employers who say above, if you have more than 3 children, then we can only have 3.
Yeah.
So such rules are being introduced in different sectors. And the other thing with packages, that just one point I would make, is that in Qatar, you had employers who would offer you a salary plus defined benefits, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you receive a separate allowance for schooling, for transportation. But I think the trend there is also moving towards what we have in the UAE, which is you get one figure, and that's everything combined into one.
Okay, you get a full package. It's not broken down into X, Y, and Z in terms of allowances. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to a different question. Thanks, Shujaat, for that. I'm going to skip a couple of questions, which I'll come back to, but I'm going to go to the Kuwait specific one, which is Kuwait friendly to outsiders? I always thought they were I've added the very here. I always thought they were insular. And I'll add to that question in terms of my own experience is probably similar. Been to Kuwait a couple of times for work only, not for living. And I found it not less welcoming, but I just found the Kuwaitis a bit more standoffish as a people than, for instance, the Qataris where I was living, or the Emiratis. I don't know, maybe it's a perception, but even within, actually, I'll let me broaden that question a little bit to you. There's a perception even within the GCC that the Kuwaitis, even amongst, for instance, the Qataris and the Emiratis, that the Kuwaitis are a bit more standoffish, even within the nationals.
That's true. I'm talking about the latter part of your question around within the GCC countries. Kuwait is not the most liked country, and there are reasons for those. But you're right, they have got those attitude issues. But in terms of the perception and the general kind of persona around the Kuwaitis, I think it all comes down to that when you land at the airport, of how they treat everyone and how the customer services is kind of interacting with you, right? And those people are not bothered and they don't want to talk to you guys. Yes, that is true. But that's just the front end of it, right? So you should not take that as the benchmark to say that's how these people would behave.
Sure.
I think once you start living in the community, it becomes very different. And at the workplace, there's always going to be a distinction between the expats, the locals, as well as the people from the working class countries. But they would still interact with you, and they're very nice, right? Once you know them, it's like any other part of the world, right? You've got very nice people, and you've got not so nice people. So they are friendly, right? To answer the guest's question, they're very friendly, but you have to be friendly towards them as well. You have to understand a bit of their psyche, that they always think, right, that you come over from overseas and you've got lots of experience and you'll be able to tell them what to do, and they would feel kind of a chip on their shoulder that they have to listen to you.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that part of it that comes.
Which is often forgotten, isn't it? It's the responsibility on our side as well.
Absolutely, because they feel threatened, right? Whether they say it or not, right? If they hide you, they would like you to make do all the work and make all the decisions. But at the same time, right, they want to be in control, because they want to tell you guys that we're the boss, at least in the Kuwait. And unfortunately, sometimes they make those ridiculous mistakes, right? Just by proving to someone that we're your boss, right? And they kind of come in at the wrong time with the wrong decision, and it backfires. But if you do work with them at their level and be able to interact with them in the nicest way, they are very good.
Okay, excellent.
Very workable people.
And Shujaat, I'll throw this one to you. And I'll maybe answer a little bit myself as well, if people don't mind. Do you ever feel that you are at home in your host country, or do you always feel like an outsider? I mean, I was in Qatar, like I said, for like a decade or so, and I think that's coming up to a decade, right, for you in the GCC?
No, not quite, Burhaan. Still playing Qatar. But it's been about 5 years.
Okay.
Half of it.
Half a decade.
But when you fly in to the UK, do you feel like you're coming home, or do you feel like you're coming home when you're on the way out?
It's a difficult question. Home is where the heart is, and home is where the family is, right? For me, the early part of my experience in the Middle East, my family was not with me. So I'd say, in that period, to say feeling at home, it's difficult. But now my family are here, and we do feel like we're establishing some roots. But the origins will always be the UK. We travel back every year, meet siblings, meet parents. So in the true sense, home is always going to be the UK. But if the question is around, do you feel comfortable over here? And the answer is yes. I think there's a lot of respect between locals and expats, and within expat circles over here. And it is really a really safe and secure, friendly place to be living in. So in that regard, I'd say it does feel like home.
Okay. Yeah, I concur with that. I mean, it's I certainly felt while I was there and my family were there, it was definitely, I felt like when I was flying out of Heathrow, I was going home. I'm not sure how, if I was to be there now without my family, well, I'd feel the same way. But Mustafa, it's a slightly different case for you, having been brought up in Kuwait. But so share your experience.
Well, well, firstly, I think I echo with you guys, right? Wherever the family is, wherever the heart is, right, is where you feel you're from. But I think we are people from a diverse backgrounds, right? We always get to understand where we're from, and that's a bigger question, right? That is outside of this main conversation. But just focusing on the Middle East side of it, I think the more time that you eventually spend and you get more in tuned and more engraved into society, right, whatever that is over a period of time, that becomes your home.
Yeah.
Because your social circle is there, you're eventually one part of your social circle becomes like your family, immediate family, because the network is so strong. And if you're enjoying it, eventually someone from your family turns up as well, right? If not in the country right next to you. And there's always some kind of family around you in one way or the other. And it does help, right? I think in my opinion, right, so it's slightly complicated because I was the third generation in Kuwait. So for us to say Kuwait is not a home would have been a difficult question, because it is. I still go back every year. We haven't been 2020 because of the obvious reasons, but go every year. At least my parents still live there, and it's a fantastic place to come, right? But do not. It's a difficult question, right? But do I feel home when I'm going there? Yes. But do I also feel home when I'm coming back? Yes. So I am divided.
I mean, in that way, I mean, we're all very fortunate, right?
Yeah.
It's a very privileged place to be able to call multiple places home, and to have that attachment to both where you were born, brought up, but also where you kind of aspire to be as well, and like in the Muslim lands. You're listening to the Midday magazine with me, Burhaan. We are live on 87.9 FM in the London area. You can join us on ramadanradio.org. You can live stream us on YouTube and Facebook, and you can text in and join the conversation on Expat Life in the Gulf on 077 614 60614. One of the key differences between, for instance, the show we did about Turkey and the Gulf is, in Turkey there is a route to citizenship, which we discussed on Sunday, and that's one thing which always concerns people who are going out to the Gulf. The kind of the sword of Damocles hanging over their neck in terms of their residency being pulled, losing their job, and having literally within two weeks or so having to pack up and go back. How secure do you feel when you're there, and how can you increase that level of security, if at all? Shujaat, do you want to take a crack at that?
I think in the Gulf in general, there's always a little bit of sense of insecurity because of the transient nature of expatriate populations over here, right? If you look around, a lot of people stay in their jobs 3-4 years on average, and then they move around or they go back home, right? Whether you're a teacher or whether you're in any other profession. So I think there is a sense of insecurity. However, I know for example, in the UAE, there are new rules that have been introduced for not for citizenship, but for longer residency.
Yeah. Was
so
that the golden visa and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So there are options. So I think you have to buy property for a certain amount, and you could become eligible. So I know some people who do that, right? Some people who wish to retire here. They may invest in a property, rent it out for a time being, or live in it, and then they have something to fall back on. It gives them citizenship, not citizenship, sorry, a residency. And then there is business opportunities. So I think going down the business route and opening a commercial venture here also opens up some options outside the scope of having to work for an employer.
I know it's a similar case. I'll come to Kuwait in a second, but in Qatar there's a similar program as well. So if you buy property in certain parts of the country, it's meant to come with, although there were some problems administrating this, come with a 99-year residency as well. But then, I mean, that's exclusive to a particular property development, and so it was really the preserve of the wealthy and the elite. But also within the legislative framework, they have been talking about introducing kind of a green card equivalent in Qatar for a few years now. And it has received some pushback from the locals, and so it hasn't gone through the process, the legislative process, as quickly as I think they thought, or maybe they're just kind of testing the water. I'm not quite sure. Of course, coronavirus has put everything else on hold for the time being, but I think that is something they're still looking at, and I think it is something will come into Qatar in the next 5 years. I'm pretty sure it'll come into Qatar in the next 5 years, some kind of green card sort of policy. Is there anything similar in Kuwait?
No.
or any push for it, or drive for it, or?
So I think there's a bigger question, right? So the question is, do you feel safe, or can you get pulled, right? And the answer is
exactly.
You do feel safe, right, within the traditions, because Kuwait is the only country, right, where they do take a pride in having people and not to fire them, even if they're not performing. So the whole thinking is that I'm going to have 5 people working for me, right? I don't need 5 people, but I want to give employment to 5 people if I can. So the thinking from Kuwaitis' perspective are very different from Sadqa Jariyah. So you do those things at different levels. I remember back in the days, right, and I'm talking about a couple of decades ago, when I was working in a professional firm in the Middle East, and they said, whatever happens, right, we will not get lay down our staff in any way, right? Whatever the crisis comes. An example, in 1990, during the Kuwait War, these big firms, when Kuwait went on their invasion, were requested all these professionals to come over to Saudi, and each one of them got their job at the same pay in Saudi.
Okay.
Right. That's the level of how committed those people are. So from a kind of thinking that they have got the opportunity to dismiss you, or you've got insecurity, yes, but from a traditional perspective, that's not really kind of utilized in reality. Now, coming to your question around the green card and those kind of things, Kuwait is relatively a small country, very small country from a size perspective compared to all the other GCC countries. It is just second to Bahrain, because Bahrain is smaller than that as well, right? But Kuwait is, if you believe it or not, right, is only 25% populated. The rest of the 75% is still desert, right? Do they want to develop it? Yes. Do they want people coming from outside and living there for good? They are trying to do the similar things from a property perspective, but it's been stuck in the parliament. Things have not kind of progressed for obvious political tensions locally, because there is a different dynamics between the professionals that they would like to give that to, the locals, and then people who are either from 2 different backgrounds, or the likes of people that could have been from Iran or from Iraq, and they've been there in Kuwait, and that causes a difficult situation, right? Those kind of people. And then there's the final thing, which is the people with no nationalities, the Bedouins, and how to hold them as well, because there's a large population in Kuwait and the north of Saudi as well, where the tribal scene still exists.
Of course.
So it's a bigger question, unfortunately, and a very complicated one. But the simple answer is, you're safe. Are you going to get nationality on a very exceptional basis? They might do that. There are exceptions, but you have to be fully immersed in them completely. Were my ancestors given? They were offered and they rejected, and unfortunately, that's still in their papers. So that's the reality. That is the reality.
And in fact, we've had a question through asking just this question around horror stories about people's contracts being terminated at short notice, etc. And I would agree with what you're saying broadly across the Gulf, that maybe that kind of thing happened a number of years ago, where employers would use that as a leverage against people, almost as a threat. But I think all of these countries, I can certainly speak about Qatar, and I'm sure you guys would be able to add from your own experiences. they've matured a lot in terms of what the interaction and what the dynamic is between the local population and the expat population. There's a greater amount of respect between the two populations. It's not seen as adversarial as it was perhaps a generation ago. And I think that maturity is reflected in the fact that that leverage is not used on people that, you better do as I say, or I'm going to have you kicked out of the country. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think it's very rare now. I think it happens. I think it's much more the exception than it is the rule.
I would agree, Burhaan. I think the labor laws are maturing in the entire region, definitely in the UAE. So there is more protection for employees. I think with any new opportunity, the devil's in the detail of your contracts as well. And I can't stress how important it is to go through your contracts in detail. So terminations can still happen at short notice, but it's rare. The person did ask also, can you then plan for the long term? As a Gulf expat, knowing this, and I'd say that you can. You need to keep your options open back in the UK, right? I think it's prudent to do so. At the same time, when you're in the Gulf, I think it's important to also build a network, right? Build a network in the Gulf so you can move around. When times are difficult, you can find opportunities. And keeping your skills afresh, right? Because there is a risk of becoming too comfortable.
Yes.
When you come out here, maybe you just stick to your job, you become comfortable, you get into a routine, and you do that for a number of years, and then when times get tough, you don't have many options.
Yeah.
So I think just being aware of that would help you.
That's a really good point, and that's something which Shujaat, obviously you're still in the region, and us two we've come back. But my experience of that, and Mustafa, maybe you can speak to this as well, is that actually coming back to the UK, my experience in the Gulf wasn't regarded as highly as, for instance, if I'd been in a European country, right? Or if I'd come back from the US or from Australia or from Singapore. The fact that I'd come back from having a Gulf job was seen as not a hindrance, but you kind of come back at one grade down from where you were in the Gulf. Do you think that's fair, Mustafa? Did you find any? Have you experienced something similar? Not necessarily personally, but with other people.
No, I had experienced that very similarly because I was seconded and I had to come back, and we had a similar conversation. Do I agree to that? Right. At the time, I didn't. Right. Do I agree to it now? Probably not. Right. I think the experiences are valid. The experiences are different. Right. Are they parallel to be utilized in UK? If UK would like to start working more openly across the globe, then the answer is yes, you need to do that. But from a 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule, right, is that really relevant for the European market that they're operating in? And I think that becomes a question, right, a bigger question. And I would agree with Brother Shujaat, what he just said as well, right, because the perception is some of them become too comfortable in certain spaces. So knowledge is still set back in 5 years or 10 years when you were here. And things have moved on very quickly in UK. So I think coming up to speed, it's for all the professionals to do so. And I'm sure there's a learning curve that all expats have done that. But in the past, it never used to be. They were really comfortable. So it's a challenge. But I think we ourselves as individuals, professionals, have to keep ourselves relevant to both sides if you want to keep your cards open. Now, I do want to go back to one point, right, fairly quickly, and not
sure.
more than 30 seconds on that. I think the long-term side of it also impacts when your kids start to grow up. Because when I was there, growing up, the university side of it was a challenge because you do have great universities, but they're not as the ones back home. And then the family one by one just splits out completely. And then you get to this level where if your kids are all living back in England and you're living by yourself outside, then you just start to get that emotional detachment and the decision to come back. But that is the other reality. But then I've got friends who have lived and did their studies here, and the first thing they did was went back to Kuwait or Middle East, and they're still working there. So it just depends on individuals, but you have to go through that period, and that period is very challenging.
And that's a very good point you make about education, and especially the higher education and university life, which is the key reason why we moved back as well. My eldest son was getting to university age, but even that, if you project another 10 years forward, that whole model of primary, secondary school, university, job is changing now. And the kind of the default of going to university rather than going for apprenticeship schemes and things like that, that's not rapidly changing, but you can see that becoming much more of a 50-50, 60-40 balance over maybe the next 10 years. So maybe that issue won't be present in that time. Shujaat, I've got a specific question for you, because I think of all the Gulf countries, probably the UAE is the primary destination for most people when they think about going to the Gulf. That's probably the first place they think of, and a lot of people probably don't know the differences between the cities in the UAE. Can you give us 60 seconds, 90 seconds on on the differences between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, which are the two core places, and maybe mention a couple of the other places which people probably don't even realize exist? You know, Sharjah, Fujairah, Al Ain, these kind of places. What advice could you give to any Brits out there who are thinking of moving to the UAE?
So, as you rightly mentioned, so Dubai and Abu Dhabi are, they're the core cities. Abu Dhabi is the capital. It's more of a reserved city compared to Dubai. For those who have not traveled to this region, there is a lot of cultural attractions here in Abu Dhabi for people to see. There's a national museum being built. There's a Sheikh Zayed Masjid. There's a Formula One that takes place here. There's an island. There's a lot. That being said, it still is a sleepy city, so that may be surprising when you consider all those things within one place. But compared to Dubai, it is, and the reason for that is Dubai is a different force altogether. The glitz and glamour of Dubai is is unparalleled. In the Middle East, full of energy, lots going on all the time. It really is like being in a busy metropolitan. So Dubai is typically where people go for the holidays. I would say branch out to Abu Dhabi also. Other Emirates, there is Ras Al Khaimah, which is further north, and that they have desert resorts there. They have the biggest zip line in the Middle East. It's quite a mountainous terrain. So if you're into the outdoors, it's a nice place to go. It's about 2-3 hours from Dubai. Other places include Sharjah, Ajman. There's some new resorts coming up there. So tourism is the one thing which is central to all the Emirates here. They're all promoting tourism in their own setting, and each Emirate has its own appeal.
And are these places you mentioned, you're talking about from a tourism point of view? Is there any? Would you advise anybody from expat community to live there? Are they livable places for British expats?
I think they are.
Ras Al Khaimah, these places.
Ras Al Khaimah is, yes. I know of expats that live in Ras Al Khaimah because they work there. At Sharjah, there's a big community there of expatriates. Not so many British expatriates, but definitely from other countries in the region. The vast majority of British expatriates you'd find in Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Yeah,
they make up the largest nationality when you look at it as Americans, etc.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dubai and Abu Dhabi would be the preferred choice for many. But there are opportunities coming up in other Emirates as well.
Okay. And Mustafa, if you were to do like a pitch for the Kuwait Tourism Board or the Kuwait Expat Board, what would you say are the advantages that Kuwait has, or not even the advantages? What are the things which would perhaps attract people to consider Kuwait as an option? Which I think is, I personally think I think it's a great option, but I don't think it's considered to be so.
Yeah, so I think it's a family place, right? So if you want to live with your family, have your family interaction immediately and socially, right? That's a place which is less distracted from everything else. It's safer. It is a small country, so you can literally go from one place to the other in 15 to 20 minutes. So you don't have to drive for hours, right? At all. And everything is local. So it's very, very easy to kind of explore and move around. Has it got the historical aspect of it? Yes, you've got lots of historical things, but the history is kind of fairly new for those guys. But because of the Kuwait invasion, there's lots of stuff that people can go and see. Has it got entertainment like Dubai? No, there isn't, right? And
Who does?
Right, it doesn't exist that way, but I'm talking about every kind of entertainment that you can think of across the board. But going for the likes of jet skiing, right, having water kind of side of things, yes, because the beach is very open over there, so you've got those, but you don't have things like Formula One. You don't have things like big shows around, right, in concerts and stuff. That's not happening. However,
are there plans for that to develop though? Is like, for instance, Saudi is now opening up to entertainment shows and concerts and stuff like that, and I think they're trying to get F1 as well there.
So Saudi is
wrestling tournaments and what have you. So is there similar plans afoot in Kuwait?
No.
Okay, we'll move on.
They put a step behind, right, and say let everyone else do what they're doing, right? We'll come up, right, in 5 years, right, to think about what they haven't done, and then we'll do it, right?
Yeah.
This way.
Is that because there's no plan because they're not interested, or because they want to do it but they haven't worked out how to do it, or it's just not a direction they want to go in?
No, they want to feel safe, so they want someone else to experience it first.
Okay.
They want to learn from those people. So I'm not saying they're not risk takers, but they are very too prudent at times, right? And I think with the political aspects of what Saudi is trying to do, they really don't want to come into these things, right, of trying exactly the same model at the same time. They'd rather stick to their guns and say, right, we'll do what is needed. Once they are successful, we'll follow their steps to make this as a second place.
Okay, and I think the point you made earlier was a really good one in terms of how, Kuwait's a small place. It's pretty much Kuwait City, and then there's a few little pockets of population outside of that. And same with Bahrain, which is basically Manama and then not much else apart from that. And Qatar, I'd say, is almost the same. You have Doha and Greater Doha. They try to call it different cities like Lusail, what have you, but it's pretty much just like, Greater Doha, and it's 90% of the population is there. And you can go from top to the bottom of the country over like 1 hour and a half or so's drive. And you can go from one side of the city to the other in 20, 25 minutes, like you mentioned in Kuwait. UAE is much different to that, right? You've got 3, 4, 5 very different population hubs. And then Saudi is a completely different beast again. Right, it's like if you excuse the term, it's like a proper country. It's like it's got
yes.
The east is much different from the west, from the south, from the north. They have different climate, different tribes, different population types. But I think, just to come back to Kuwait, just 1 second, is that one of the advantages I think, which is correct for Kuwait, is that because it's not perceived as the most attractive option for whatever reason, it's actually that makes it less competitive to find work there. Right, so you've probably got a better chance of moving there and finding a job there. Would that be briefly? Would that be fair? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yes, that would be very fair, but not in the current circumstances, right?
Sure.
The COVID side of it. But yes, it is very, very it's less competitive to Dubai because people don't want to go. It's not their first choice.
Yeah.
And But trust me, I know people that lived in Kuwait and went across to Dubai or somewhere else, right? And the first thing is, when can we go back to Kuwait?
Yeah.
Right. That's what it is. So it's something, once you get into it, right, you feel more, you feel the difference between how things are lined up for you, right, as individuals and as families.
We've got about a minute left, but I'm going to ask Shujaat just to give me 30 seconds on his favorite thing about Abu Dhabi and his favorite thing about Doha, and 15 seconds on each.
I think that the easiest way is to compare the quality of shawarma in both places, right? No, look, both of these places are the most progressive places in the Gulf, I'd say. Abu Dhabi is safe and secure, family friendly, as is Doha. One of the best planned cities in the entire region, I'd say. And that's evident from also the response to COVID. We can go on forever on that, but yeah, in a nutshell, the balance between between city and seaside in Abu Dhabi, I love that, and I think the cultural history of the cultural attractions in Qatar.
Okay, great. Sorry to have to cut you there. We've got 10 seconds left. Thank you very much to Mustafa, to Shujaat, for sharing your experiences about the Gulf expat life. And we will see you next time on the Midday magazine on Sunday at 12 p.m. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.